you accept that the Undersecretary for the Department of Defence was prepared for a briefing. There was a briefing prepared which included a series of PowerPoints, and one of them was slide 9. And on that slide, it talked about how the Pentagon was advising, or people inside the Pentagon were advising the Undersecretary for the Department of Defence that whatever the phenomenon is, it is capable of manipulating human perception and consciousness. And if you accept that, I mean, I'm not detracting from the claims that people are making about seeing aliens or seeing life forms or seeing entities of some kind. But if you accept that, how do we know what they're seeing is real? Now, I'm not saying it's all a hallucination or an illusion. I've had some very angry experiences or abductee claimants who have jumped on me in the last few weeks for supposedly criticizing their experience. I'm not. But what I'm saying is we have to approach this with a reasonable degree of scientific objectivity. So I'm not yet ready to say this is little green men or reptilians or greys or tall whites or whatever. I've spoken to people who claim to have had these experiences, but unless I can verify them, this is the problem I have with a lot of experiencer claims. I'm not in their bedroom. I mean, I had a conversation with a guy who was very, very senior in the FBI during my research. And I expected to meet this sort of hard-headed skeptic about the phenomenon. Instead, he told me that he woke up in the middle of the night and he and his wife were paralyzed, and there were grey, big-headed, big-eyed aliens sitting at the end of the bed. And he told me this incredible account and trusted me to keep his name confidential, but he wanted me to know it was real. And I said to him, but how do you know it was real? How do you know you weren't in some kind of induced dream state? And he told me a few things that made me think that maybe he was having a genuine experience. But then I said to him, well, the phenomenon is capable, allegedly, reportedly, of manifesting itself in different ways to humans. In the 19th century, when people looked up in the sky and saw UFOs, they were looking at flying airships, flying ships in the sky. In the book of Ezekiel, they describe winged chariots. There's been a phenomenon going back thousands of years, but how do we know that whatever it is, it's not manifesting itself to us in ways that allow our brains to comprehend it and manipulating our perception and indeed our consciousness? That's the only question I ask when people start talking about, taxonomy of aliens or whatever. How do we know what they're seeing is physically what's there?
By investigating this phenomenon, have you had the government come to you and tell you to speak or not speak about certain subjects? Have you had your phones tapped in any? Have you had your emails? Well, emails are tapped to some degree already, but I think you understand what I'm asking.
Yeah, I don't want to sound melodramatic, but I think any journalist who does the kind of work that I do a lot of national security, a lot of defence, and a lot of intelligence work. I just naturally assume that my phones are off all the time, that somebody's listening. One of the things that people need to understand is that Signal, which is an app that a lot of people use in the belief that it's totally and utterly safe, is absolutely compromised. I know they'll dispute this, but my understanding is that the Five Eyes have the capacity to access the Signal encrypted communication system and probably all the others for quite a few years. People who are interested in this should read a series of articles about the CIA's penetration of a company called Crypto AG, which was a company in Western Europe. I think it was German or Swiss, which for years sold some of the best encryption equipment in the world. And it turned out that it was totally compromised and the CIA had a backdoor into the technology for years. So people like me assume, as a matter of course, that our communications are compromised. I've learned from people in the intelligence services about ways to communicate very safely. A few tips. If you're not using a VPN, you're insane. And you should use that VPN in conjunction with good quality encryption technology. I also use message boards online in the dark web to communicate with some of my better sources. But have I had warnings from government? No. In fact, I've had encouragement. I've had encouragement from people in both Australia's intelligence services and enormous encouragement from people in America. Because I think, frankly, what's my best interpretation of why this has been kept a secret? Because it has. There's been a cover-up for years. Let's be honest about this. I don't know exactly what they're covering up, but they've been covering stuff up for years. Why have they covered it up? I actually suspect it's as simple as the majority of people who are aware of the phenomenon inside, certainly the Five Eyes, that's Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the UK and the US, the majority of people who are aware of the phenomenon inside the Five Eyes aren't briefed into the ultra-secret material. So to them, it's a genuine mystery. And the people that I've spoken to in the main, the people that I've spoken to, at least at the very beginning of my research, were people who were prepared to privately acknowledge to me that, yes, the phenomenon is real, but we're buggered if we can understand what it is. And, I've spoken to people, for example, in our intelligence and defence here in Australia who've told me that, there are objects, mainly orbs, but also craft routinely seen around some of our more sensitive defence installations, particularly Pine Gap, which is the really super secret base in the middle of Australia that we run jointly with America. And they've said to me that, frankly, their view is the reason it's not talked about is because governments are kind of embarrassed about admitting it. We're spending billions of dollars a year for national defence and the protection of our population. I think America has spent over $1 trillion since 9/11. And to what effect, if there is this technology, this intelligent technology operating in our skies, our oceans, and our atmosphere, and our orbit, to what effect is this money being expended if, frankly, governments can't protect the public against whatever it is, or at least inform the public of whatever it is? So I guess I'm giving you a very long-winded answer, but I want to give you a kind of a cultural understanding of where I sit. I think most people that I've spoken to in defence and intelligence, in agencies that should know, privately admit to me that they are as confounded by the mystery as you and I are. But I have also spoken to people who privately admit that they know more and that the US knows a great deal more, but that the United States has a very close hold on that information and that it's more than top secret SCI. This is something that is very, very closely guarded, and that the number of people that are actually briefed into it inside the military defense intelligence infrastructure in the United States is actually very few. It doesn't include presidents, and it doesn't include Congress, which I find breathtaking. I hope that answers your question.
Sure. You also mentioned you were encouraged by some of the people in the government. Now, when I was speaking to Jim, I'm not sure if you saw this, but I was speaking with Brian Keating and Tom DeLong and Jim Semivan. I'll link that in the description. And in that conversation, Jim said, when I asked him, how do you distinguish between psyops or disinformation campaigns and so on, he said that the CIA doesn't conduct disinformation campaigns anymore. It's illegal. Right, right.
Bullshit. That's just I'm no disrespect to Tom. I'm sorry, I'm a keen student of CIA, MI6, SIS, and Australian disinformation over the years. And one of the things you have to be wise to as a journalist that covers intelligence matters is disinformation is part and parcel, with great respect, of how organisations like the CIA operate. And for heaven's sake, we need them. We need disinformation. The sad fact is that the CIA was a victim of disinformation going into the Iraq War. One of the biggest catastrophes in recent time was the disinformation that was spun by Ahmed Chalabi and the Iraqi National Congress to entice America into an invasion of Iraq on the false premise that there were weapons of mass destruction. And the the thing that I don't think has been adequately explored around the world is the fact that America itself and Britain and Australia were all victims of one of the most clever disinformation operations in recent time. So the notion that intelligence services don't and aren't still using disinformation, to me, is incredibly naive. Disinformation is how intelligence operates. And one of the things I'm wise to as a journalist is, this is why I've had people tell me, for example, that there are craft, non-human technology sitting in warehouses somewhere in America. Now, a lot of people in ufology, when I say that, they think I'm saying, yeah, that's real. I believe it's real. I don't. I can't. Nobody should. Nobody should believe any of this until they've seen it with their own eyes, and until we've actually literally kicked the tires of the TR-3B, if it does have tires. But frankly, we have to be skeptical, because one of the plausible explanations for me in my mind about why America might be talking about this stuff now is because it's worried about a confrontation with China. And maybe it's trying to send a message to China that it has some ace in the hole technology, perhaps derived from alien technology, that it's capable of using and pulling out of the barrel if it needs to in a confrontation. And, frankly, people have told me that is the case, but I'm not going to believe it until I see it, because disinformation is so wild in intelligence. I've been lied to so many times by spies, and as a journalist, you just have to walk away, because the first thing they're wanting you to do is get really excited and go, oh, wow, I've been told this by a real spy. And I can remember very early on in my career when I did meet my first people who were working in intelligence. I was actually based in Southeast Asia, and I met a CIA station chief in a certain Asian country. And I was flattered to be a young freelance journalist and being taken out for a lunch in a restaurant I couldn't afford by a guy who I knew was agency. And then I realized, because I'd been in possession of information the week before, I was being lied to. And he wanted me to push a particular line to support a particular opposition group in a particular country. And
you realized that in the moment while you were speaking with them?
I did, and I realized I was being manipulated. And that this is something we all have to be wise to in ufology. I mean, it may very well still be, and I really hope this is the case, if this is true. It may very well still be that America really does have anti-gravitic technology. Maybe they've developed this on their own, and maybe it's got nothing at all to do with aliens. And maybe there's been a clever disinformation program to try and spread the notion around the world that America is invincible because it's somehow got alien technology. I mean, I just don't know. But I think we should really keep an open mind. I mean, I was amused. I got a bollocksing from some dweeb debunker the other day who said, I believe in aliens and I believe in UFOs. I don't necessarily. What I'm doing is I'm exploring the mystery, which is what journalists should be doing. And there's a fundamental misunderstanding here. I think this is one of the things that has scared journalists off, because there's a tendency, I think, for people to assume that because I'm engaging with this subject matter and taking it seriously, and I do think it should be taken seriously, that I believe credulously everything that everybody says. I'm sorry, but I don't, and I don't think we should.
Do you think part of the reason for this ridicule, this jibing from large media organizations against publishing anything related to UFOs is related to Chomsky's manufacturing consent? There's this relationship between the media and the government, a symbiotic, or you can see it as parasitic.
Look, I've been in, on completely unrelated issues, I've been in editors' offices in news media organizations when I'm in possession of highly sensitive information. I once did a story for one of Australia's top public affairs programs called Four Corners on the public broadcaster, the ABC. And by complete chance, there was a lot of unhappiness inside our equivalent of the CIA, ASIS, the Australian Secret Intelligence Service. And a number of Australian spies went public with me on national television. And one of the things they talked about was favours that we would do, plausibly deniable favours that we would do for either the Brits or the Americans, which gave the Brits plausible deniability or the Americans plausible deniability in the event that anyone got caught or in the event that the operation became public. And a lot of this involved bugging of Warsaw Pact embassies during the Cold War. You know, if you wanted a bug planted in the embassy of the Polish Republic, during the Cold War, you got the Aussies or the Kiwis to do it, or the Canadians, funnily enough. Your CSE was very involved. And so the junior cousins in the Five Eyes Alliance were basically used as stooges to go around doing plausibly deniable favours. And I can remember when we did that story, we actually edited it off-site because we were aware that there were people inside the public broadcaster who probably did report back to the security services what was coming up on programs like ours. So we kept it off the books and we kept it super, super confidential. And then in the wake of the program, one of the things that we revealed, for example, was that, and I still to this day, I find it amazing because we were sending our tech ops boys, guys who bugged rooms with highly sophisticated bugs, to Kuwait at the end of the 1991 Gulf War to bug Kuwaiti government offices so that British government companies could win contracts in Kuwait against Australian companies. And so these spies were saying to me, why are we doing this? You know, we're being paid money by Britain to bug Kuwait government offices without the knowledge of Australian spy masters. And these plausibly deniable favours are being done in such a way that they're actually competing against Australian companies for the same contracts that are being awarded. And another thing that was happening was that in the period prior to the handover in Hong Kong, you know, incredibly sensitive negotiations were going on between the British-held Hong Kong and the Chinese government. And there were Chinese government officers in Hong Kong. And the British wanted to know what the Chinese negotiating position was. And so they planted bugs in the Chinese government's offices in Hong Kong. And the people who did that were Australians. And we revealed that on this program. And I can remember, oh my God, the pressure we came under as a TV network, especially because we were a government-owned broadcaster. I thought for a while I was going to go to jail because, we were revealing national secrets and we'd essentially encouraged people who were under a security oath to reveal what they knew. And the nice thing about it was, I'm sure they'd still dispute this to this day, but there were reforms made in the accountability procedures of the intelligence services to improve themselves as a result of what we revealed. And it was a good, healthy purge, frankly. But what it taught me was the level of undisclosed communication that occurs between government and a news organisation, even a public broadcaster like the ABC in Australia or your CBC in Canada. There are informal chats, there are informal relationships, and I'm sure there is surveillance of journalists in this country. I've had reason to believe over the years that, yes, I am being tapped from time to time. I often do sensitive investigations that upset governments. And I guess I just take it for granted that they're going to monitor me. And one of the things that I'm agonised about is making sure I protect sources. This is one of the big problems for me when I was writing my book. You know, you agonise about making sure that if you're going to approach somebody and invite them to give information, you need to be able to protect them. You have an ethical responsibility to protect them. And I've worked out ways of doing this in the course of my research for the book that I hope have protected the confidentiality of some of my more sensitive sources. But yes, there is a nexus between media organisations and government when it comes to intelligence-related matters that makes it very, very difficult for me to say that we are absolutely free. And I've seen compromises made inside organisations when we've got big stories, which I find kind of puzzling and irrational. And it reeks to me that somebody's ahead of me. I had an incident once where I was investigating what are called disruption operations. There were refugees coming on boats from Indonesia across to Australia. And I stumbled by complete chance across a people smuggling disruption operation being run by, I thought, our federal police. And it was done in conjunction with members of our defence forces. And it was only belatedly that I discovered that it was being done also in conjunction with our ASIS, our Secret Intelligence Service. And there was some pretty grubby things being done to stop boats from getting to Australia, to disrupt people smuggling operations. And that's the scaredest I've ever been in my career. When I think one morning I came into my office early and I turned on my computer. It had just been in sleep mode. And I suddenly realized that the cursor on my screen was moving through files and I wasn't touching it. And more importantly, whoever the person was, when I did take control of the cursor, in the 2 or 3 minutes before they realized that they'd been compromised, I realized that whoever they were had super user status. They were logged into my system as a super user, and I could get into anywhere on the network, into places that I couldn't normally get into. And I still remember I rang the IT department and I said, guys, are you in my computer? And they go, no. And I said, I've got this weird thing where the cursor's moving on its own accord. And they told me, check your mouse, all these silly things, turn your computer on again and off again. And then I said, yeah, but I can get into X file. And I didn't say I'm not saying here what that file was, but suffice to say the network at the time the network that I worked for at the time was owned by a billionaire called Kerry Packer. And I realized that not only did I get into all of the files in the news network, I could also get into all of the files in his business network. And I remember I said this to the IT guy and I could hear him running down the corridor towards my office. And then both of us watched as this cursor moved across my screen and then eventually just disappeared. And so somebody was on my computer. And it's the one time I've been aware as a journalist that somebody was actually accessing my material. And I can tell you, I was scared. It was a really scary time because, you realize that when the forces of the state are deployed on intelligence matters, there's a degree of ruthlessness and a degree of willingness to break laws, to act unethically and improperly, because they are sanctioned to break laws. Intelligence services are allowed to do things that other sections of the government aren't allowed to do. And it scared me. It scared me as a journalist. And for a while there, I stayed away from the whole subject matter because it was quite intimidating. The funny thing is that with the phenomenon, with UFOs, UAPs, when I've engaged with people at a senior level in government, and after a fair period of chatting about other things, I introduced the subject of UAPs. There's two things I expect. The first is ridicule, laughter. And the second is a complete reluctance to engage. And you know what? Neither has happened. I've been quite surprised. I've spoken to ministers and former ministers in our government. I've spoken to people in our intelligence and defence services. And when I raised the subject of anomalous phenomena, they're immediately engaged.
Mm-hmm. And they have their own stories.
Exactly. And it made me realize as a journalist how badly we've dropped the ball on this, because there was, talking about disinformation, there was a very deliberate disinformation program instituted by particularly the CIA in the 1960s and the 1970s. And for all I know, it might have been for quite laudable reasons, because apparently, especially during Project Blue Book, they were just getting swamped. All of the different agencies that were responsible for monitoring foreign incursions into America were getting swamped with these sightings of anomalous objects. And you can see in the paperwork that there was a growing concern that they weren't able to get on top of in the event of a Soviet attack. They wouldn't be able to get on top of which warnings were legitimate and which warnings were just this weird anomalous phenomena that nobody really wanted to talk about. Mm-hmm. And I can sort of understand why they wanted to shut it down. To me, that's a semi-plausible reason. And it's interesting because when I have engaged with people about this in government, I've actually been very pleasantly surprised. And it's why, as a journalist, I feel motivated to continue, because there is a willingness to accept that, yes, this is a legitimate subject for investigation. And yes, our friends, the Americans, are probably hiding something from us. We accept that, Roscoe, but that's pretty much parcel and parcel of the Five Eyes. Yes, we're cleared into the intelligence that goes through the sharing agreements under the Five Eyes agreement, but we're very, very well aware that the Americans are always working on things in private aerospace and new defence technologies that we're not always immediately read into. And I think a lot of them assume that the objects that they're seeing are Black American technology, but they're definitely seeing things.
What makes you think that your computer is safe when you're using a VPN or on the dark web if they can access your computer and perhaps screen capture, even take keyboard logs?
One of the things I regularly do, and I've been doing this for a while, and anybody can do this, is you can download some pretty good virus Trojan checking software from a company called iMazing, who, in particular, they've been able to detect the NRO Pegasus software, which is this really intrusive software that's been used very aggressively against journalists, including, sadly, the guy who was chainsawed to pieces by the Saudis in Turkey. There's been increasingly, there's been misuse of intelligence-related technologies, particularly those built by the Israelis, who are pretty ruthless in this regard. One of the things I've done a story about, and I think you can find this on the web. When I was at 60 Minutes Australia, I did a story that actually CBS 60 Minutes picked up as well on the SS7, the Signalling System 7 system that operates behind mobile phone telephony, which essentially leaves a backdoor in all mobile phones. These mobile phones that are so ubiquitous that we use around the world now without even thinking, they are wide open to tapping, wide open. It's such a huge hole, and it's never been fixed, because to fix it, you would actually need to change the whole architecture of mobile phone telephony. And I think it's really important that people know this, because I assume, as a matter of course, that all communications are compromised. I use communications systems that, to a lot of people, would look insane to protect the security of some of my more sensitive contacts. And that literally involves both of us logging on with a VPN and Tor software, going into the dark web and accessing a place in the dark web where we essentially leave messages for each other. That's about the only way a virtual dead letterbox that I can think of coming anywhere near being able to protect the confidentiality of a secure source. And I'll go to those steps. I'll go to those measures. And I've done speeches where I've talked about how wide open mobile phone telephony is. And I see, I was shortly before the lockdown was instituted here in Australia, I had lunch with a federal minister in our government who's in a very sensitive portfolio. And he was taking phone calls from his staff on his normal mobile. And I said, "Don't you have an encrypted phone?" And he went, they're effing bullshit. He says bloody things that just slow things down and you can't hear, And I said, "Yeah, but you realize how wide open these phones are?" And he went, yeah, that's what ASD tell me all the time. And ASD is the Australian Signals Directorate. They're the people that they do the bugging with the National Security Agency as part of the Five Eyes, but they are also responsible for communications infrastructure security in this country. And I know that ministers are warned all the time not to use mobile phones, but what they don't realise, and I emulated this in a program where I was in London and a bunch of hackers in Germany, all I'd done was give them my mobile. And I was in London and I said, "I'm going to be having a phone call with a federal politician in Canberra in Australia at 7 p.m. London time. Can you hack me?" And these German hackers from the Chaos Computer Club, working with a German company that, with legal authorization from the German government, were using a SS7 portal, which is a portal that opens on the internet to give you access to mobile phone telephony. They were able to hack my phone call. by only knowing my phone number. Because once they had my phone number, they were able to get my IMEI code. Once they had my IMEI code, they were then able to patch into my phone call using this signaling system 7 backdoor messaging channel that's used for mobile phone telephony. And I really think this is important. And I'm sorry if I'm sounding like a nerd for a moment, but if anybody wants to see my story about this, I'm pretty sure it's on the web. Just Google Ross Coulthart mobile phone telephony, 60 Minutes Australia. It is an absolute outrage that the communications companies haven't patched up these holes. And I always laugh when you read Apple giving assurances that their phones have been made more secure, or where you read people from different encryption companies talking about how safe their phones are because they've got encryption and, you know, various levels of 245-bit encryption or whatever. The reality is that if you have the back door that exists in mobile phone telephony, mobile phones are wide open. All governments know this, and all spy organizations know this. And a lot of private corporations that sell data know this. And one of the things I did as part of my research was I approached companies in the US that freely sell this technology. They offer it for a lot of money to anybody prepared to pay. And you could literally listen in. If I wanted to listen to all of your phone calls, Curt, and I had the money, I could do it tomorrow. And it doesn't matter what you put on your phone. And so people have got to stop thinking that communications are in any way safe. And I say this to journalists all the time. I occasionally teach at journalism schools, and I say to students, you know, you guys really need to understand the importance of protecting sources. And there's always a kind of a nervousness about it, because for millennials, this is how they communicate. This is how they engage. This is how they engage with culture. And what we don't realize is how much we've given away as a result of having this easy communication access, and what it's doing to investigative journalism. Because I assume, as a matter of course, that if I'm communicating on a mobile phone, any communication is being monitored and listened to.
Does that apply to if you're browsing, or if you're going on YouTube or messaging over a certain app? Or is it only when you call someone?
If you're using your mobile phone either on the web or as a communication tool, they can track you. There's no problem. It's very, very easy to get hold of anything, any data, any voice message, any data, anything that's going over your phone if you're using your phone. When it comes to, say, using your PC or your Apple laptop to browse the internet, I mean, sure, you should use a VPN, and I use Tor a lot for confidential communications with sources and for searches where I don't want people to know what I'm searching. There's a great search engine called DuckDuckGo, which is an anonymized search engine. But even then, you should be using that in conjunction with Tor, and you should be updating the latest versions of Tor. I'm also, I used for years a thing called PGP, Pretty Good Privacy, which was an encrypted system. And if people look, they'll find there are very similar systems like that that are commercially available. And again, because of crypto AG, which I told you about earlier, I assume that all of these have got backdoors in them, and that a determined state aggressor can access any communications it wants to. I mean, there are Trojans that can be inserted on any mobile phone simply by you receiving that Trojan. You don't even have to click on it. Frankly, you know, if somebody wants to hack you, they can hack you. But am I really that important?
Watch more podcast clips now on our YouTube channel. Go to Livewire Podcast Clips and watch more great podcast videos just like this one.